In September 2017, over the space of a month, 600,000 Rohingyas fled their homes in neighbouring Myanmar to come here. For over 100 kilometres along the Teknaf highway in the southern tip of Bangladesh, thousands upon thousands of men, women and children are looking for a new home, a new future, and food, shelter and clothing. The sheer scale of human suffering never seems to stop. This is a historic movement of people, but at least they are alive. From these very camps across the Naf River can be seen Mongdor Province, Myanmar, their former home, where for much of that September, smoke plumes rose from the jungle. The telltale signs of the horror that has made this tragedy into one of the most shocking crimes this century so far. For Myanmar's leader and Nobel Peace Prize winner Aung San Suu Kyi, it was the Rohingyas themselves who were to blame.
On the 25th of August, 30 police outposts, as well as the regimental headquarters in Downdanza village, were attacked by armed groups. Consequent to these attacks, the government declared the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army and its supporters responsible for acts of terrorism as a terrorist group in accordance with the Counter-Terrorism Law, Section 5, Section 6, Subsection 5.
The Myanmar government have banned journalists from entering Mongdor province, so little footage of what happened has come to light, snapshots only. The burning villages, the dead, the mass of people on the move. The government said their clearance operation was in response to a terror attack. 500,000 people have paid the price. And in these camps, everyone has a story to tell.
Ara para mother military bina raita tinno bazoloti golli raita tinno bazoloti goli guli mare
itara medila ediya de fara sarada hotu giddi balaine de tara bekin gormad buda shilan de to buda itara fara goli da daj guli mara shuru goje
tara bina aftroba da ara guli sara shuru Guru Sarada to hold about the good Silam. The Tamada Faja, Beguntamade Kata Mikata or that the Gorgo to the other do by the Doimaton Lonchamariore, Lonchamariore on Jaradi.
I shot that Gorod Goli, but I knew Maridori, Niala, Yanrucha Mari Guli, Bari Mari Nela Nela, Mari Lojargoi, Bedangun Nela, Zalamadu, Jamata, Woodguri. Ara bekun guzori khandirar और भूम बुआई तारा दाम मनर खाचा भूम बुआई तारा नो देखी बादे ओ बाबा कल इतरा रे मारी फिली बो बेकुन औजान कोई फारल्ला मरतवन
तारा के मुझे आरा गो तू नेलीरी माने क्या मुरा हासन ना जो बाहर जाके दे लुका जाए बल्ला कोई तू लुका जाए जाए बल्ला क्या रे डा डांगरा सी मजा आरा सगो हो रही है तू फोर के आके मुझे सी विदोरी आई सी विदोरी क्या मुरा उस की दे दावा की तो गोरी ने मारी
Gordo Tomo India and Nilidani, Nilide, there was I there Capitalica was she one and Lidua, Guli, the Kitty, the home better Mare Guli, Talbadara, Hodura, the Era Murad Zonamalu, Shilam, Luasilan, the Tamacamo, Gulimara, out of the head, the Arbet as a dog idea. Oh, pay.
Nelle the man in Mariveli Vala Nello Jargodua, O babba ekol parale babba ekol ozo itarare mari beli ba aro le kaneli sai. Engo yore nelle de hede kware guli moi pori mori yede. Are nila gura buan lo yore ono tala made mela majete je beshi. Bura manjore mari mari entu kodana tu ba bong mari mari oro. Ekware bura bile dunia rotu. Toko chabuangin ora damanan mori giye kesu.
Beda bala gungi beda bala dar thari bala ku into maje ku mare kesma lage dudar hago ashil purale bala yi bana diki sai ge ye dun oshuke din tulote oshuke din sinta ya bazi hago shikha bala dar kam hashikana ya bazi yen habid de dan tarala hata hoine marde
Some of the stories the refugees tell can seem too hard to believe at first until you come here to Cox's Bazar Hospital and see the evidence for yourself. This is Mohammed Huresh. He's 13 months old and his torso is covered in severe burns. But Mohammed wasn't so lucky. Eventually his father was able to pluck him from the flames. In this ward, the terrifying ordeal the Rohingyas have faced over the last few weeks is laid bare. This boy was shot as the army fired indiscriminately into their village. This boy injured as he leapt from a boat crossing into Bangladesh.
Most of them are gunshot injuries, about 110, and these gunshot injuries have other associated injuries like soft tissue trauma, multiple fractures, and some abrasions, lacerations, etc. Some fractures, according to their statement, they have told that they have been thrown away by the militaries and other people.
Ondera gorfuri gya ma gomata shilon dina dasha baze thana to aira ba kaira gungiya mama goran ashil mama machar hamud gya hada ondera jera marga maro on phoje gomata shilon de hada fujamara mugor tatina li jamba ar ogom ashil hi narmati marban na gya ba mahalika goramara ashilon fujara mam ta gor tatu taraturi li jamba ni ondera mid gya udan mara gya garamar gojamar amatama maira
tara luri dan dan bodore thagi tabada ara nasutgi ma function gungi gormade ala nasuri ni dede guli fire go jidede ala ergal khon guli fire go jade phara matam military go ara kafir de jamada musulman kiede musulman de ara Rohingya ne ara basha manush eto rakiri hang guli mar de bazi ko munanne
guli abase ne lide phone ka madrasa ka hazana ka dure de phone guli abase kala hangere phone anto gi de de phone chon le ani garama dala gori gi de garama dala gori re phone da ar kodun ke gede tu tuwa khana dala goti goti de ondara de guli hodi dure jate hara malate guli mari ayer mani ondara der garama da ara da dumuri dari phone le re dumuri dari ka zargi de kala farati ne liore dangura lamide namade odu guli ai foji ga de
ay dere bua fonate ziaro bala dia kuramba bala dia to aro fonate bua fora soketta he digera mo dunia no da so mara famde guli indi bayri.
The gunshots, the systematic burning, the terror, as the United Nations points out, this bears all the hallmarks of textbook ethnic cleansing. The evidence against Aung San Suu Kyi and the Myanmarese army of crimes against humanity, satellite images of towns no more, hundreds of thousands of witness testimonies began to mount as soon as the crisis commenced.
The credible information we gathered indicates that the destruction of Rohingya villages in northern Rakhine states and other serious human rights violations committed in the aftermath of the 25 August attacks were executed in a well-organized, coordinated and systematic manner. The information reveals that these human rights violations were committed against the Rohingya population in northern Rakhine State in Myanmar by the Myanmar security forces, often in concert with armed Rakhine Buddhist individuals.
We invite you to join us, to talk to us, to discuss with us, to go with us to the troubled areas where we can guarantee security for you, because we don't want the added problems of anything happening to any of you. And we would like you to join us there, see for yourself what is happening, and think for yourself, what can we do to remove these problems? And also, I want you to take special care to study the peaceful areas. How have they managed to keep the peace?
We decided to take Aung San Suu Kyi up on her offer by flying into Rakhine State. On first impression, Sittwe is a quiet, peaceful town. But if you look closely, you can see telltale signs of ethnic cleansing. Rohingyas were first expunged from this town in 2012. The central mosque now boarded up, disused and overgrown. And here, empty fields in the centre of town. 5 years ago, this was a bustling Rohingya neighbourhood. Now, nothing, except for some new houses that are beginning to go up. They are for Rakhine Buddhists only. This is what a successful campaign of ethnic cleansing looks like. On the outskirts of town is a sight that the tourists don't get to see. Rohingyas that once called this town home now languish in camps. We've been told there is no way for journalists to get in. They are too heavily guarded by the military. But by using back roads and by finding a driver brave enough to take us, we are able to make it into one of the Rohingya villages on the outskirts of Sittwe, where at least there is a mirage of freedom and prosperity. But once again, look closer and ask some questions, and a very different reality becomes clear. The village is poor, the public spaces flooded, risking disease. Roots flourish from the jungle, and yet amongst the squalor, a bonanza of cows, stolen from or left behind by Rohingyas fleeing the atrocities further north, into the hands of Rakhine traders and sold on to these Rohingyas down south. Ever since communal violence began 5 years ago, these Rohingyas have been stuck in this village and in the surrounding fields. If they leave, they risk being arrested or attacked by the military or by Rakhine villagers. It is, in effect, a prison.
Harike penguriwa Honda se arar honakam gyanai hode arar honakanan mare pawandi gorina wari holi ara gati pengurdi class duo hala se ya narar gati dia yan ti duo do bare ase dia wandi gor korona dohorwa gorwa ya sitania siketara de fardi no dore ki futin dora hai ne dora te so gom nai la chalai baso da ta hore.
This village is as good as it gets for Rohingyas in Myanmar. The rest are either fleeing their burnt-out homes or languishing in camps. Outside the village chief's home, the Myanmar flag flies in a desperate attempt to prove their loyalty. Shami Udin welcomes us into his home. He's received direct threats from the army.
Mane are ehon hodiria nora ise ta ko mane mongdo busiro kyau de nilan nawan mane gamhara tedim pugura uru.
It is very little known that the great majority of Muslims in the Rakhine State have not joined the exodus. More than 50% of the villages of Muslims are intact. They are as they were before the attacks took place. And we would like to know why. This is what I think we have to work towards. Not just looking at the problems, but also looking at those areas where there are no problems. Why have these problems been Why have we been able to avoid these problems in certain areas?
Back in Sittwe town, for the Rakhine population, life goes on as normal. Local people seem completely ambivalent to the suffering of their former neighbours nearby. There are no protests, no calls for the ethnic cleansing to stop. It's as if nothing ever happened at all.
La gule haya mal tang sai boje ari na bare titara ni airi ni daba zora ji tari ba dat to jai a to ji ba aje ki bari ari ka jidi ni aje ki ba je mani ari ane bar di bare zogara ji airi ni daba tara
gya badi kya hotir gora beda gya militarian to si lo jai mon to lo jai yor bedi andare bajar fel ar ki ore angor ki ore lanna buna gori bele ta gor gali di bele endila gori gori arare be jiti be umate gotte arar bujian dollar na bayara yar maya bandere beshi zulum gaira gojje
Ara hanale ora hede banam gatte kulti matatti gol horora kulti mo gasandal nolige gol horora dangkhoda mada hori gelam boy dangkhoda mada hori gelam boy hede na polola hede abazayara toyara na polola halaya han adar gone thoni ola halaya mo gasil be mari halaya
ar bayre tama lot pai ai te gar khotul gulle melin da fadi ore te তালে আর যদি লাগরে দিলে হবে হয় তো আর মা দেবা মরদ তোমাদে আর বেতে ফুড়ো আর মা ইয়াদার বাবা আর ওকদা ওষুধ গরাই অহুতি তার তো ফন্না ফরাস হ্যাঁ গরাই ফন্না ফরাই 10 ক্লাস হইছে 9 ক্লাস ফাসনে 10 ক্লাস ফেল গিয়ে মতো দুনিয়া দের ব্যাংক वाले কি মর ভাই হলো বলিও
in Pietro. Questa domenica ci riporta un passaggio chiave nel cammino di Mone.
Sono arrivate tristi notizie sulla persecuzione della minoranza religiosa, i nostri fratelli Rohingya.
During September 2017, when the ethnic cleansing was at its worst, international criticism flooded in from across the world, and protesters hit the streets in many countries. But here in the capital of Myanmar, there are no protests, instead overwhelming support for what the government calls clearance operations. At a cafe, we spoke to some local people.
Their population is growing up too much. Bangladesh, the population is very high. So most of some Bangladesh are coming into Myanmar across the border.
These views are commonplace in Yangon. There is very little deviation, and it's very hard to find anyone who has any sympathy for the Rohingyas.
All the satellite images of the burnt out villages, so who burnt those down?
I think Myanmar people don't want to burn the houses.
So who burnt them down?
Yes. Someone.
Yes,
we cannot go red-handed.
Yes.
We cannot go.
Why would they do that?
They want to internationalize the program. Internationalize the program.
They want to get international support.
Internationalize support.
At the newspaper stand, it isn't hard to see why these views are commonplace. Story after story, blaming the Rohingyas for the violence. There is little press freedom in Myanmar. One of the few people unafraid to think differently is human rights advocate Mo Thwai. We met him at his office in Yangon.
The problem is like since the problem started in those areas, there were no freedom of the media. So that we are getting the news only from the government side and mainly the military. After the government, defined them as the terrorist group, the people's, opinion changed. Everyone thinks this is the real terrorists.
These images were promoted as proof by the government that Rohingyas were burning down their own homes. It turns out that the woman seen here wasn't a Rohingya at all, and had merely put a sheet on her head to make her look like a Muslim. And social media has played its part with images like this, purporting to show Rohingya terrorists. It's actually a photo taken during the 1971 Bangladesh Liberation War.
I would say we still have this Islamophobia in the country. So the military regime is using that Islamophobia all the time along the history to divide the people. There were also rumors there will be jihad by the Muslim, and also military itself, they declared that there could be the terrorist attack in Yangon and Mandalay and other cities. So people are really scared, and then more and more hatred against between the different communities.
Portraits of the woman ultimately responsible, Aung San Suu Kyi, are available all across Yangon for tourists to buy, although her image internationally may never recover from the accusations now hanging over her government. But for her, it's not the international community who are going to help keep her in power.
If she is going to say something supporting to the Rohingya, it is really dangerous for her political image. Even though there are the obstacles and there are those kind of pressure, but sometimes the leader like her really need to say the righteous things.
The Rohingyas are so unpopular in Myanmar that Aung San Suu Kyi faces a dilemma: to continue defending her government's crimes against humanity or risk losing the support of her own electorate.
It seems that the military could do anything right now and the people would be okay with it, and that's what's scary.
Yeah.
There seems to be no forces in Myanmar that is going to stop what's happening.
No. We cannot. It is really complicated. It is really risky. Even if I sat in the Burmese media, if I talk in the Burmese media, this is if I use the term like genocide, or if I ask the military to stop the clearance operation, I will be the traitor.
Not far from Mo's office, in a typical downtown side street, is the only Rohingya political party in the country, although they are careful not to use the term Rohingya in fear of reprisals. I asked the group's leader about the terrorist attack that the Rohingya Arakan Salvation Army allegedly conducted against the police and army checkpoints.
I think not I, almost all Rohingya think they are not working for Rohingya. They are utilized by some vested interest group to make the area more serious, critical, and finally to become a militarized area there.
But it's understandable. I mean, this has been going on for years now, the persecution of the Rohingyas. It's understandable if many of them take up weapons to fight, surely.
A lot of people, a lot of groups thinking of taking arms to fight for their rights. But it is not time, I think. They are also not fully prepared to make some sort of armed struggle. You need a lot of what you call potential support, you see.
So I wish my leader to say okay, this is a terrorist attack, or this is a violence attack we have to face as a government, but we have to be very careful not to affect any, innocent civilian.
Myanmar government wants to get rid of these Rohingya in that land.
Scared yet relieved, they're over the worst of it. Rohingya is making the final leg of their journey across the Naf River into Bangladesh. Their homes have been burnt down, many have witnessed massacres firsthand, the boats are overcrowded, and many have drowned. What's more, the ferrymen charge extortionate rates, eager to make good money while the ethnic cleansing lasts. Upon landing, it's a struggle. Food must be found, and shelter.
आरारे ना उसे बैठाएंगे ना रोड पीछे पीछे मारी फेलर गई किए पापराले बच्चे किए ना हमारे मार तो जगह किए गई इधर किए गई आज शायद डेढ़ पीछे या बेकू मानुष मारा आनी आनी गत मजे गत मेरे कुरी कुरी 3-4 जन दौरे दीदी और गाड़ी फैलाइए
आता है ना हमारे हेड मुरा गुल्ली गई इधर आते तल आते हमारी मारी लौरा नारा गुल्ली गई गोली बाद हेड गुंडा बोला ता जहाँ ना ये होना सारा ना मेरे आरा बंगाली बंगाली को हेड होले देखा आरा लो भारी ने साइकिल हो यार दाची दी तार बाद हेडे फारा तो अच्छी दिया ना कुंडिया छुड़ा मादे हेडियो फारा बच्चा दाते मिलिट्री आई लौरा यार हेडियो गुली मारे ना आरा बिडियांगुल लुआ थे क्या आरा दात हेड सोरार गया हाड़िया से एंगुरी लुआ थे क्या आरा हेड एंगुरी नेडी थे कि पानी मादे दूर पानी
इधर वो दबाई उसी गोरे बेटी गोरा दी लो बोनी अब बाबा बार गोरी यारे कैसु माल दाल कैसु नासाई आरा बॉर्डर हाथ दाची आरा कैसु लोइने बार दिया है गुरा बाजा गिरी हावे जोदेर रोदेर जोरा बिजेर रोदेर वाचा तिरचा 3 दिन तक की
हंदला वाशा करो हंदला तागी रहते 7 दिन तागी बाद है आये हम तो फोन आरे आप बाइट वो ये हंदला हमबल ले रहे हंदला हमबल ले बारगो गले श्यामा शे बारगो जेदे बारगो रे बाद सरबाई लामी मानसे टाला यार लाशो विषय होता तो ए सर दे आइलंदे
এবার তাইনে বাড়ি বেন্দিলা যখন গজে বলনা আর ঘড় যাই ওয়াইচা তিরে চাকাল হাসুরে একবারে কুলাই রেঙ্গরি গরি 3 দিন আনিক তাকিলাম এনতো হাত তমুরা ভাড়ায় গুফিট ডালা ভাই ফাতিয়া ডালা ভাই তো হাত তমুরা বাড়ি আছি দে
पोटरा पहुंची बाद ही हमारे आमतार आसर तो मादे दे नौका भाई लपाई दे नौका तो गेबार नौका बारा मासा जनपति मासा दियम बोली होय आणि एकले भारेगा कशा मला पुरे तुट्टी गए श्यामला तो उड़ी
सुरहा फारगारा वाला आला दखन दु होने बारे सुरहा फारगारा वाला त्यायो हम नला लगते हम नला जेतारा त्या दिया पारे इतर आय पारे जेतारा त्या दिना पारे इतर आरा मरिले फुडिले केंगोरी जाइमेन होय इतर आय ताजार गय आरा बाप बाय बे गुंतागी गय आइने भारत दे त्या ला बोली बाय बुंदु बिसे आसे इतर न बरमारे कुले फाराजिम फुरा न दे हिया न मदे तागी गदि फुरा दिले आरे फुरी जाइमा आयो ना फाइले होले केंगोजु आय बोला बोने आइने भारत दे त्या ला
Noor shows her ID card and photos of her family taken by the Myanmarese authorities. Evidence, she says, that she is a Rohingya and was born in Myanmar. Many Rohingyas have such evidence, but it doesn't seem to be enough.
They have been Burmese full citizen in British time, in parliamentary period, in so-called Revolutionary Council period, and even in 2010 elections. They were allowed to vote and to stand for the election. So these people feel themselves to be full citizens of Myanmar.
Most of those people they were born in this land, so they should, be protected by this country, and they should be able to involve in this country affair.
In order to find some common sense and wisdom, I decided to visit a monastery in the capital.
Bangri lumyo bali. How damn na? The Rohingya sura mishiu. Rohingya sura tongdelu. Purelu.
I asked the monk whether this opinion justified the violence against them.
Going ko misho biro. Topye jara bo. Elo topye ne le solo shin. Dilo achempe la le solo shin. Da duroတရားဥပဒေကိုမလေးစားမလိုက်နာလို့ဒီလိုဖြစ်တာဟုတ်တယ်မလားအဲ့တော့တချို့ကြတော့သူတို့မှာ plan ရှိပြီးသား viewer တွေရှိပြီးသားအဲ့တော့ကိုယ့်ရင်ကိုမင်းရှို့တယ်မင်းရှို့ပြီးတော့ထွက်ပြေးတယ်ဒါသူတို့မှာ plan ရှိပြီးသားသူတို့မှာ step by step အနေနဲ့ဒီ viewer တွေရှာပြီးတော့လုပ်ပြီးသားပေါ့ဆိုတော့အဲ့လိုမျိုးတွေကို နားလေထားဖို့ကနိုင်ငံတကာမီဒီယာ
Ashin Kumara is part of a new breed of nationalist monks gaining increasing influence throughout Buddhist countries. The most famous is Wiratu, otherwise known as the Buddhist bin Laden, who speaks proudly of turning Myanmarese against the Rohingyas.
Actually, I don't agree about this term like nationalist Buddhist, because in Buddhism there is no, like the nationalities, there is no race or, or color or whatever. So in true Buddhism, we don't count what is your nationality or what is your sex or gender or whoever. But some of those people, like some of those bad monks, they are abusing the name of the Buddha to, incite the hatred and conflict in the country. So I just say they are not the Buddhists.
ရှင်တို့အင်ဒိုနီးရှားကနေပြီးတော့ဗုဒ္ဓဘာသာနိုင်ငံအခုမွတ်စလင်နိုင်ငံဖြစ်သွားတယ်ဘောရပတ်တော့တက်တက်ပြူနေတယ်မလေးရှားနော်နောက်အိန္ဒိယဆိုလို့ရှိရင်မြတ်စွာဘုရားပေါက်ဖော်တဲ့နေရာမုံလာပိုင်ရှင်နေရာဒီကနေ့ဗုဒ္ဓဘာသာဒီ0ဖြစ်သွားပြီနော်အဲဆိုတော့အခုဒီမြန်မာနိုင်ငံမှာဦးဇင်းတို့ရခိုင်ပြည်နယ်မှာတခုတည်းကိုပဲဟုတ်လားမွတ်စလင်ကလာဥယေကသူတို့အင်္ဂလိပ်လူမျိုးတွေတအားသိရှင်သူတို့ shit ကိုစားရတယ်လေငပိကိုစားတဲ့လူမျိုးမှမဟုတ်တာငပိဆိုသူတို့အနဲ့မခံနိုင်ဘူးလေအဲ့တော့သူတို့နဲ့ဆိုင်တာတန်ချင်းနေဖို့ထိုင်ဖို့ယေရှုဖို့ဟုတ်လားစားဖို့တောက်ဖို့ဆိုတာမိမိနဲ့ဆိုင်တာသူနဲ့မဆိုင်ဘူးဟုတ်တယ်မလားသူလည်းတော့ပြောလို့မရဘူးအဲ့တော့ဘယ်လိုလို့ဒါကသူအပိုင်းလေ
অবশ্য আশি দিন মানলি আর নদীকে নশাই মারলে কম হাতের গুড়ি মারি দিলে পারে হয়তো 80 বছর যে বুঝার তো মারি ফেলাই দিই তার তো মারি দিয়ে ফেলাই দিলে কম হাতের গুড়ি মারি দিই আর কম নবারও হয় নিরি তারা বেদিনী কম তারা কাফের আর ওদের রোহিঙ্গা জাতি লোম রোহিঙ্গা বলে তারা টাং মারে আর দেশকে রোহিঙ্গা হয় আর টাং মারে ইতারা না আর দাঁড় মারি ফেলাতে তারা
টানা চোখ মার জকিয়া কয় মারের মানুষ গাঁটি মার জকিয়া কয় মারের খনে মারে আমরা চোখ নদেখি কি বলে আলিকিন বলে আমরা চোখ নদেখি কোনোদিন তারারে বলে বাদ দি আমরা তারারে বলে জাগা দি রেং কয় কয় শুন আয়রে পাড়ার মাঝে অঞ্জালি দি ফেলে পাড়া ধরা
তো তারা আয়রে আর তোমরা এদেশ ন তোমার বাংলাদেশর তোমার বাঙালি আর হর তারা ওই তারা বাঙালি গেলে আমরা জন্ম দেয় আর বর্মার তার মা আর বাদে দাদা তারা বিয়ে দিই তো আর তোমরা এদেশ ন তোমরা রোহিঙ্গাও ন তোমরা আছে এরিয়ারও ন তোমরা আছে মানি বাংলাদেশর তো তারা আর ওয়ার করা শুরু গুলি চালা লঞ্চা মারি গরু হুরা দিবেলের
বাজে আর খেলা মাঝে দিয়ে কেন বুঝিম তারা তো আর কম দিন হর আর রোহিঙ্গা ন বলে হর আর কেনা ন বলে হর তোরা সুকাহানা জেরো দেখে ওরা জগই হারি ভার দি বাদে ভার দে হার না ভার দি আমার হাত হারি ভার দে হারি ভার দি ভাই ভার দে ও বাজে এরা গোয়াটি আর না গুদা আর বাক্কা মিতাম
Islamophobia, nationalism, religion, but the real reasons for the ethnic cleansing are more opaque. It's easy to think of Myanmar as one people under one nation, but in reality there are over 60 unique ethnic groups within its borders. Burma is how the country is still known by many, but the Burman people only make up around 65% of the population. Many of the other groups have had and continue to have thriving independence movements. In the last 30 years alone, multiple conflicts resulting from these independence movements have sprung up across the country, resulting in what many label as the world's longest running civil war. The most prominent conflict continues in Kachin State to this day. The Rakhine people are also ethnically unique, and many Rakhines desire an independent state. Better then, the theory goes, for the Myanmarese army to win Rakhine support by helping them get rid of the Rohingyas. The threat, real or otherwise, of Islamic terrorism also helps to keep the country united. Without doubt, this plays a major role in the government's thinking. The other reason is money. Rakhine State, like much of formerly communist Myanmar, has been relatively untouched by mining and corporate agriculture. But this is changing. Foreign companies are coming in, and the Myanmar government has already sold off land formerly owned by Rohingyas. There are also potential oil and gas reserves. The country is nestled between the world's two most populous states, China and India, both of which are thirsty for resources.
I heard very recently Myanmar has sold on an area about some hundreds of square miles, you see, at the south of Mongdo, where uranium is formed. You see, Chinese company will come there.
For what?
Uranium.
Uranium, okay. Titanium.
Titanium as well as uranium there.
The West, too, is keen to get in on the act. When former US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton visited Myanmar, she took with her representatives of some of the biggest American corporations. When former British Prime Minister David Cameron visited, he did the same with British companies, criticised Myanmar too heavily, and they will look elsewhere for their trade partners. For the Rohingyas, it simply isn't in any powerful nation's financial or strategic interest to help them. For these reasons, the Myanmarese military has been able to carry out the successful ethnic cleansing of over 500,000 people and the mass murder and rape of untold numbers in full view of the world, and nothing has been done to stop them. When it rains in Bangladesh, it pours, and it was pouring for most of the week we spent in the camps. The rain makes life more difficult for newly arrived refugees, as if everything wasn't hard enough, and the rainy season was supposed to have ended weeks ago. For dozens of miles up the Teknaf highway, the sheer numbers, men, women and children, are staggering. When the rain stops, food and clothing is handed out. So far, though, only the Bangladeshi government has helped.
We need food from abroad because the people are distributing food for temporarily. It will not long last. Obviously, we don't have enough resources to help Rohingya people around 7 lakh or 8 lakh. It is not
8,000, 700,000,
700,000.
The situation is very fluid, and the flow of new arrival hasn't stopped yet. So it's been 2 months, 587,000, estimated 589,000 people are already there, but new refugees are arriving. That's why it has become now the biggest refugee crisis of recent years. A lot has been done, but the needs are enormous on ground. It's not that we are not responding to the needs of people, it's just the scale and the speed of this whole crisis is just so unprecedented. That's why we are now going into this pledging conference to ask for more support.
As usual, millions in aid has been promised, but it's unclear how much will get through. For the most part, the Rohingyas will most likely have to fend for themselves, with rudimentary support from the Bangladeshi government and the United Nations. Whole tent and bamboo cities have now been added to the map in southern Bangladesh. They now resemble refugee camps, but in a matter of months or years, they may have developed enough to be mistaken for towns and cities.
গরম বেশি গরমও বেশি এখন দাসে বদাস গিনো আনেন দিলা গরম এরিয়া এখন দাসে যেত মাঝে আজ 2-3 দিন পর্যন্ত আই যাই খানা পিনা লইলে বেশি দুঃখ পাই আর আছে আর ফিল্মিন মাঝে আছে ইয়ানা মাই দুজন ওয়া দুজন সাতজন সার্ভি মিলিন মাঝে 16 জন আছে বাদ পানি ফাইলেও খাই নখাই তো কোনো দিলে বাসান মারি রাখে আগুন নলালে খেঙ্গুচাম বাজি অসম যেতে পালাই যে বেগুন গমেরি খেঙ্গুচাম
নহয়তো মারা চাইলে শান্তি পাইম না নহয়তো আগে মতাইছি গিয়ে দাদা মরি গিয়ে আছে দিন মরি গিয়ে আর আরা যাইরে খেঙ্গুচাম দুজন মানুষ দিয়ে দেন আয়া আর মতালে দিয়ে দেন আর হ্যাঁ দুজন মাঝে হ্যাঁ সাইজন মাঝে নিরি লই দিতে ইয়ানামা যেতেদিন রাখিব আর এতদিন তো ইয়ান তো যদি লড়া দিলে আর একখানে যাইম দূরি মনে করতে এলা আর নিরস মজ সে দূর তকমা দিন হৃদয় মজ জিকে শিক্ষা যাইম দিদি
তারা তো চোখের পানি পুরা গিয়ে হয় বাদে আরা জিন্দিগি তল্লাই আরা বর্তমান মাঝে নলিতে তোরা না আরা তো বর্তমান মাঝে যাগই পারিবে কইলে বেকুনরে টাল মারিয়ে করে হাতিয়ার ধরে গুলি মারি বলে তো আরা নই তোড়ে
বর্তমান মাঝে বর্তমান নিলে না যাবে যদি নলি দিলে কেন যাই কেন বুঝিকে পেড়ো বই মজমান নলান না খুব পেটপুরি খেঙ্গুচাম
ইন্দিলা যাই মুই বাজে আর দেশ ফলাই হন আর তেড় আসছি দেখুন খুব শান্তি লাগ দিও না এখন দুই দেশের মনে তুলে বলে কি ভেজু জবিনের মাঝে দাম থাকি গই বিলের মাঝে জবিনের মাঝে গরু সর মা দিয়ে দূরে থাকি দে
The credible information collected also indicates that the Myanmar security forces purposely destroyed the property of the Rohingya population, scorched their dwellings and entire villages in northern Rakhine State, not only to drive the population out in droves, but also to prevent the fleeing Rohingya victims from returning to their homes. The destruction by the Tatmadaw of houses, fields, food stocks, crops, livestock, and even trees render the possibility of the Rohingya returning to normal life and livelihoods in the future in northern Rakhine almost impossible.
A registration camp for Rohingyas. After getting settled, they are encouraged to register with the Bangladeshi authorities in order to receive food and other essentials. Stripped of their identity in Myanmar, finally a welcome sight. As names, photos and fingerprints are taken, they are being treated as human beings once more. But we soon find out that there's a problem. Earlier in the day, cards were being issued that clearly stated their identity as Rohingya. Now the word Rohingya has been dropped and they're angry.
Ara Rohingya lo bolo hoye ra ara tu maavana mari wale ikkya mari wale bai amori ke ikkya mari ke bolo Rohingya la bolo Rohingya giras kole bolo sajja ara motto jodi mema bolo hoye kadile gaun le gani.
And all of a sudden the Rohingyas rebel. Men and boys collect up their identity cards and return to the registration centre. After a standoff with the army, who refuse to take back the cards, the refugees stand firm with an act of defiance.
We have delivered the card. It's their responsibility to keep because as per the government's policy, so for she has declared, they are supposed to have this card. They must. And if they are not in possession, they will be responsible for this.
The day started by registering refugees. Now it's suddenly turned tense. After some threatening overtones by the army, the refugees disperse, crucially without their cards, for which they have waited much of the day in line for. Stripped of their identities, their villages burnt, family members massacred, now a new saga begins for the Rohingyas in another land, and still the world seems unsure of what to do with them, or even what to call them. Back in Rakhine State, an apartheid system has been put in place. Rakhine Buddhists continue to live normal lives, while out in the countryside, 500,000 Rohingyas struggle in squalid camps or in villages like this, fearing for their lives every day. They have no citizen rights and are at the mercy of the police and the Rakhine villagers, and they know all about the horror that has descended onto their people not far to the north. During the editing of this film, contacts in the camps have sent me numerous stories and photos of the continuing crimes committed against Rohingyas in the region. This is Ansar Mia. He was 16. Because the roads are blocked for Rohingyas, he tried to sail to Sitwe from one of the camps in order to receive medical treatment. The boat capsized. On the boat with him were Mohammed and Ziul Hussein. By making life so hard for the Rohingyas still in Rakhine State, the Myanmar government is trying to force Rohingyas to leave of their own accord. Boats to Bangladesh or to Thailand and then on to the Muslim country of Malaysia. In echoes of the refugee crisis in the Mediterranean, at least several hundred have drowned over the past 5 years attempting to flee. More will drown soon. Babies are particularly susceptible to being pulled down by the force of the water.
Aগে বেশি কম আসছিল না টাউন সেনার আগে এরিয়া খানজাবাদ দিননি আগন্দানি লেননি সেটা মানে আগন্দানি যায় না ভারি বলে ইন্দ্রি আছে পরিচয় মানে আনমিলি আছে সাকেং আছে রে জালবনি আর রঙলি সদ্য আইলা আছে আর ভারামে আর বি জাল্লা গরিবজি উসলিবজি গরিবজি আন বিজা খাকি ই ভারি
2012 মাঝে পদ্মা তো এদের হেলালতি আর যাচ্ছে মগে বড় মাঝে বেচা বেশি জ্বালাইতে এটা যাচ্ছে ইয়ার হিবা মাঝে ডাইরেক্ট গুলি মারি ফেলেন মানুষের দড়ি হুরা দি ফেলেন
ও আল্লাহ আর আগেতে বেশি যাই জুলুম গজে আক্কা বতর বন্ধু তোর উকাটা তোরে মলই যার গো গারাতত মলই কুঙ্কার দড়ি লই যার গো দাড়ি মুছাই রাই ফেলের বা দেননি এ হচ্চা জোয়ান ফুয়ান লই যার গো এন্দিলা করি আজ 8 বছর ফুয়ান আক্কা পড়লো তি
তো আর বাজার আদরে দেবা সন মাঝে তো মানে বাজার আদরে দেতে নদী অনেক কান আনিলে খারি লই ফেলে তো আর ফুয়ান চাই যদি ফুয়ান যদি গোড়া গাড়ি বাজার আদার শোনা তো তাইলে খারি লই ফেলে বেশি দুলুং কিছু বাদে আর সুন্দর শান্ত ফুয়ান দিয়ে গিলো গড় গলিয়ে দিলে বেশা বেশি দুলুং কিছু জানা কিছু আছে মগে লগিও তো আছে
Do you think the village will be burnt down eventually? And what will happen? Where will you go if it is burnt down?
Musulman zikka যায় ইন্দ্রিরা হরে যায় জায়গা দেনে আর যায় বলে
Do you think the Myanmar government is going to stop until all the Rohingyas have left the country?
I don't see any official order or announcement that came to stop the exodus of these Rohingya people.
At the village mosque, Rohingya children learn the Quran. They are blissfully unaware of the hellfire that may soon descend on their village. For the last 5 years, the warning signs that the Myanmar government was gearing up for that campaign of slaughter was clear for the world to see. Yet nothing was done. It is now clear that 500,000 Rohingyas still living in the country, men, women and children, are under serious threat of being massacred in the coming months or years. Yet still the world is doing next to nothing to stop it.
Ultimately, our aim should be to create a world free from the displaced, the homeless and the hopeless, a world of which each and every corner is a true sanctuary where the inhabitants will have the freedom and the capacity to live in peace. Every thought, every word, and every action that adds to the positive and the wholesome is a contribution to peace. Each and every one of us is capable of making such a contribution. Let us join hands to try to create a peaceful world where we can sleep in security and wake in happiness.
Aung San Suu Kyi once said, "Fear of losing power corrupts those who wield it." She may do well to remember her own words. If not, she may turn out to be known as the politician of the worst kind, one who cares more about power than the lives of her own electorate.
We have never been soft on human rights in this country. Our government has emerged as a body committed to the defense of human rights, not of any particular community's rights, but of the rights of all human beings within the borders of our country.
पता नहीं देखेंगे ठीक है